I hate Soul Peace. Now, what does that mean? There are a lot of theories on the internet, not due to any one person in particular, but there are a lot of theories about how, say, someone has multiple souls or someone is being possessed by their sword. These theories usually revolve around the nature of Blackbeard, the nature of Mihawk, or the nature of Zoro with Enma. I've heard bits and pieces about each one of these characters over the years. With that being said, I think the only one that has ever made sense, and I've done a video on this as well, is the idea that Imu now occupies the body of Nefertiri D. Lily, and that had something to do with a previous Op fruit user. I think this makes a lot of sense because it is a narrative opt out, a Chekhov's gun being fired without the death of Trafalgar D. Waterlaw, because you're showing off the actual process of the eternal youth surgery without showing it in the present and therefore killing Law. Because a lot of these theories hinge on that conversation that Law and Doflamingo have about the eternal youth surgery and the soul swapping surgery, as the two seem to be the most valuable abilities of the Op fruit. With that being said, of course, there have been a ton about Blackbeard, even a recent one I've been hearing about how Roxy Zebek was a previous user of the Op fruit and put his soul in the body of his son. Which, to give you some context about that, the reason why people have been saying that is because Roxy Zebek in chapter 1154 holds out his hand in a particular way, like how Law usually does hand gestures when using his abilities. However, this hand gesture is just to emphasize the two questions that he's asking Loki. Nothing more, nothing less. But continuing, all of that type of stuff, I think, is complete bunk, because One Piece is about inherited will. So it would only make sense that Blackbeard isn't Roxy Zebek, because first of all, why would someone name their ship after themselves? That's weird. But it's a bit about him just being a fanboy over his father, which is a more human story to tell and a more interesting contrast to Ace. Both of their fathers were very influential and powerful figures in the world, but Ace wanted nothing to do with his father, even rejected his last name, while Blackbeard oozes at the chance of wanting to be Roxy Zebek, but for some reason can't take the Rock's name, or was unable to take the Rock's name for himself. Probably for his own protection, I would imagine, because the Marines were very adamant about snuffing out the lineage of Goldie Roger. So I would think the same would apply to any lineage Roxy Zebek could even possibly have. So their name changes were most likely for the same reasons, though we got that little extra spice on it for Ace, because we know he actually hated his father and saw Newgate, which is the former crewmate of Rox, as a father figure. So with that being said, I think that's more of a possibility because it has more narrative weight to it as opposed to op fruit nonsense. Another thing that I've been hearing is that Mihawk somehow is possessed by the will of Yoru because he has ringed eyes. From all the accounts that we've been hearing, it's way more likely, due to the nature of how One Piece is already, this is most likely a lineage thing as opposed to some sort of weird sword soul possession thing, especially due to how Loki has been shown off in the series. Because if you don't know, Loki has been shown to have very peculiar eyes as well, as he has black sclera and like snake irises, right? So that leads me to believe that there's something very peculiar about his lineage, which leads to more narrative implications. The same thing could be said about Dracula Mihawk. Perhaps the reason why he has ringed eyes is because of his lineage. Perhaps he is a part of a different race, or perhaps he is an eighth of something else, like Chimney back in the day, and how she was an eighth mermaid. Perhaps he's an eighth of something, and that particular trait is being expressed through his ringed eyes. Perhaps Emu is cut from the same cloth, and I think that's a way more believable theory that he is of House Dorona, especially seeing as how lineage as a theme in One Piece has existed for a very long time at this point. Forever. And you don't have to have the same last name in order to be related to somebody, especially based on the information that we just got about Rox being the father of Blackbeard. So with that being said, it's way more likely that the reason why Dracula Mihawk has ringed eyes is because the Dracula family, like I was talking about in another video, has some significance because it's an offshoot of the Nerona family. So that's why I don't really believe in a lot of these Soul Piece theories, because they don't really imply anything or add on to the themes that have been presented beforehand in the series. They don't have a whole lot of narrative weight. Therefore, a lot of them turn out to be bunk, because you're like, okay, so if Yoru is magic or what have you, where does that leave us? It doesn't leave us anywhere. And based on how blades were explained, it's more human, or a more fantastical variation of a human experience than it is a spiritual experience. Because as it has been explained and as I've understood it, it's more about a good blade being used in a particular way, and then it just expects itself to be used in that way over time, as if the user of the weapon originally had some effect on the weapon. And that's akin to real life. It's a fantastical representation of what happens in real life, because let's say you have a mattress, right? You've slept in that mattress for 10 years. Over time, the mattress is going to change shape to how you've been sleeping on it. Perhaps one side is now lower than the other because you favor that side, or perhaps there's an indent of the person's body within the bed. So I said to say, objects can change over time based on how a person uses them. That type of personalization is just being sensationalized in One Piece through the mechanics of what Enma can do and how it saps Haki. With that being said, give me your thoughts and tell your friends about Polypede Wax.